California to investigate. Both times the request was denied. Jessie was helping me out. She had a contact in California, but so far nothing had come of it. We watched the news from the living room floor. Janelle and Damon were snuggled up beside me. Before the news, we had reviewed our tape of Kindergarten Cop for the 10th or 12th, or maybe it was the 20th time. The kids thought I should be in the movie instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I thought Arnold was turning into a pretty good comic actor myself. Or maybe I just preferred Schwarzenegger to another turn with Benji or the Lady and the Tramp. Nana was out in the kitchen, playing pinochle with Aunt Tia. I could see the phone on the kitchen wall. The receiver was dangling off the hook to stop calls from coming in from reporters and other cranks du jour. The phone calls I had taken from the press that night all eventually got around to the same questions. Could I hypnotize Senigi Murphy in a crowded courtroom? Would Senigi ever tell us what had happened to Maggie Rose Dunn? Did I think he was psychotic or a sociopath? No, I wouldn't comment. Around 1 a.m, the front doorbell sounded. Nana had gone upstairs long before that. I'd put Janelle and Damon to bed around 9, after we'd shared some more of David Macaulay's magical book, Black and White. I went into the darkened dining room and pulled back the chintz curtains. It was Jessie. She was right on time. I went out to the porch and gave her a hug. "Let's go, Alex," she whispered. She had a plan. She said her plan was no plan, but that was seldom the case with Jessie. Jessie's motorcycle truly ate up the road that night. We moved past other traffic as if it were standing still, frozen in time and space. We passed darkened houses, lawns, and everything else in the known world. In third gear, cruising. I waited for her to slip it up into fourth, then fifth. The BMW roared steadily and smoothly beneath us, its single headlamp piercing the road with its beckoning light. Jessie switched lanes easily and frequently as we hit fourth, then rose to the pure speed of fifth gear. We were doing 120 miles an hour on the George Washington Parkway, then 130 on 95. Jessie had once told me that she'd never taken the bike out without getting it up to at least 100. I believed her. We didn't stop hurtling through time and space until we came down, until we landed at a run-down mobile gas station in Lumberton, North Carolina. It was almost 6 a.m. We must have looked as crazed as the local gas jockey ever got to see. Black man, blonde white woman, big-assed motorcycle. Hot time in the old town tonight. The attendant at the station looked kind of out of sorts himself. He had skateboard pads over his farmer gray-blue jeans. He was in his early 20s, with one of those spiked or skater haircuts you're more likely to see on the beaches of California than in this part of the country. How had the hairdo gotten to Lumberton, North Carolina so quickly? Was it just more madness in the air? Free flow of ideas? "Morning, Rory," Jessie smiled at the boy. She peeked between two of the gas pumps and winked at me. "Rory's the 11 to 7 shift here. Only station open for 50 miles either way. Don't tell anybody you're not sure about." She lowered her voice. "Rory sells ups and downs around these parts. Anything necessary to get you through the night. Bumblebees, black beauties, diazepam." She had slipped into a slight drawl, which sounded pretty to the ear. Her blonde hair was all blown out, which I liked too. "Ecstasy? Methamphetamine hydrochloride?" She went on with the menu. Rory shook his head at her, as if she were crazy. I could tell that he liked her. He brushed imaginary hair away from his eyes. "Man, oh man," he said. A very articulate young man. "Don't worry about Alex." She smiled again at the gas jockey. His spiked hair made him 3 inches taller. "He's okay. He's just another cop from Washington." "Oh, man, Jessie, goddamn you. Jesus, you and your cop friends." Rory spun on his engineer's boot heels as if he'd been burned by a torch. He'd seen plenty of crazy out here, working the emergency room shift off the interstate. The two of us were crazy for sure. Tell me about it. What other cop friends? Less than 15 minutes later, we were at Jesse's lake house. It was a small A-frame cottage sitting right on the water, surrounded by fir and birch trees. The weather was near perfect. Indian summer, later than it ever ought to come. Global warming marches on. You didn't tell me you were landed gentry, I said, as we sped down a picturesque winding road toward the cottage. Hardly, Alex. My grandfather left this place to my mother. Grandpop was a local scoundrel and thief. He made a little money in his day. The only one in our family who ever did. Crime seems to pay. So they say. I hopped off the bike and immediately stretched out my back muscles, then my legs. We went inside the house. The door had been left unlocked, which stretched my imagination some. Jessie checked out the fridge, which was generously stocked. She put on a Bruce Springsteen tape, then she wandered outside. I followed her down toward the shimmering blue-black water. A new dock had been built on the water. A narrow walkway went out to a broader deck, set up with bolted-down chairs and a table. I could hear music from the Nebraska album playing. Jessie pulled off her boots, then her striped blue knee socks. She dipped one foot in the perfectly still water. Her long legs were wonderfully athletic. Her feet were long, too, nicely shaped, as beautiful as feet get. For the moment, she reminded me of ladies who went to the University of Florida, Miami, South Carolina, Vanderbilt. I hadn't found a part of her that wasn't special to look at. Believe it or not, this water's 75 degrees, she said with a big slow-motion smile. On the dot? I asked. I'd have to say so. On the button. Are you game or are you lame? What will the neighbors say? I didn't pack my bathing suit or anything else. That was the basic plan. No plan. Imagine, a whole Saturday with no plan. No trial, no press interviews, no missiles from the Dunns, like Thomas Dunn on Larry King this week, complaining about the investigation leading up to the trial, peppering my name everywhere again. No earth-shaking kidnapping case to weigh down on you. Just the two of us out here in the middle of nowhere. I like the sound of that, I told Jessie. In the middle of nowhere. I looked around, following the line where the fir trees met clear blue sky. That's our name for this place, then. In the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. Seriously, Jez, what about the neighbors? We're in the Tar Heel state, right? I don't want any tar on my heels. She smiled. There's nobody around for a couple of miles at least, Alex. No other houses, believe it or not. It's too early for anybody but the bass fishermen. I don't want to meet a couple of backwoods Tar Heel bass fishermen either, I said. In their eyes, I might be a black bass. I've read James Dickey's Deliverance. Fishermen all go to the south end of the lake. Trust me, Alex. Let me undress you. Make you a little more comfortable. We'll undress each other. I surrendered and gave myself over to her, to the slow-down pace of the perfect morning. On the dock of the bay, we undressed each other. The morning sun was toasty warm, and I was aware of the lake breeze fanning our bare skin. I tested the water with my foot, my own well-turned ankle. Jessie wasn't exaggerating about the temperature. I wouldn't lie to you. I never have yet, she said with another smile. She dived in perfectly then, making almost no splash on the water surface. I followed in the light trail of her bubbles. As I penetrated the underwater, I was thinking, a black man and a beautiful white woman swimming together, in the Middle South, in this year of our Lord, 1993. We were being reckless, and maybe just a little crazy. Were we wrong? Some people would say so. or at least think it. But why was that? Were we hurting anyone by being together? The water was warm on top, but it was much colder 5 or 6 feet down. It looked blue-green. It was probably spring-fed. Near the bottom, I could feel strong undercurrents striking my chest and genitals. A thought struck me hard. Could we be falling deeply in love? Was that what I was feeling now? I came up for air. Did you touch bottom? You have to touch bottom on the day's first dive. Or what? I asked Jessie. Or you're a lily-livered chicken, and you'll drown or be lost forever in the deep woods before day's end. That's a true tale. I've seen it happen many, many times here in the middle of nowhere. We played like children in the lake. We'd both been working hard, too hard for almost a year of our lives. There was a cedar ladder, the easy way back up onto the dock. The ladder was newly built. I could smell the freshness of the wood. There weren't any splinters yet. I wondered if Jessie had built it herself on her vacation, just before the kidnapping. We held on to the ladder and on to each other. Somewhere distant on the lake, ducks honked. It was a funny sound. There was little more than a ripple on the water table that stretched out before us. Tiny waves tickled under Jessie's chin. I love you when you're like this. You get so vulnerable, she said. The real you starts to show up. I feel like everything's been unreal for such a long time, I said to Jessie. The kidnapping, the search for Saniji, the trial in Washington. This is the only thing that's real for the moment, okay? I like being with you so. Jessie put her head on my chest. You like it so? Yes, I like it so. See how uncomplicated it can be? She gestured around at the picturesque lake, the deep ring of fir trees. Don't you see? It's all so natural. It will be fine, I promise. No bass fishermen will ever come between us. Jessie was right. For the first time in a very long time, I felt as if everything could work out. Everything that might happen from now on. Things were as slow and uncomplicated and good as could be. Neither of us wanted the weekend to end. Chapter 61. I'm a homicide detective with the Washington Police Department. My official rank is Divisional Chief. Sometimes I get assigned to violent crimes where there are psychological considerations that might mean something to the case. I stated this under oath inside a crowded, hushed, very electric Washington courtroom. It was Monday morning. The weekend seemed a million miles away. Beads of perspiration started to roll across my scalp. Can you tell us why you are assigned cases with psychological implications? Anthony Nathan asked me. I'm a psychologist as well as a detective. I had a private practice before I joined the D.C. police force, I said. Prior to that, I worked in agriculture. I was a migrant farm worker for a year. Your degree is from? Nathan refused to be distracted from establishing me as an impressive-as-hell person. As you already know, Mr. Nathan, my doctorate is from Johns Hopkins. One of the finest schools in the country, certainly this part of the country, he said. Objection, that's Mr. Nathan's opinion. Mary Warner made a fair legal point. Judge Kaplan upheld the objection. You've also published articles in Psychiatric Archives, in the American Journal of Psychiatry, Nathan continued, as if Ms. Warner and Judge Kaplan were inconsequential. I've written a few papers. It's really not such a big deal, Mr. Nathan. A lot of psychologists publish. But not in the Journal and Archives, Dr. Cross. What was the subject of these learned articles? I write about the criminal mind. I know enough 3- and 4-syllable words to qualify for the so-called learned journals. I admire your modesty. I honestly do.